It is January 19th, so yet again, I am getting a late start on my Top Shelf Challenge. So this is the first episode of the 2026 Top Shelf Challenge. Recently, I published my recap of my 2025. The dogs are making the camera move. I recently published my 2025 recap or wrap up for the Top Shelf Challenge, and high level, I started 2025 with 52 books on the top shelf of this bookshelf in my bedroom, and I read 13 books over the course of the year associated to that challenge. So although that was nowhere near 52 books, 13 is pretty respectable. And so I'm actually very pleased with where I where I ended up at the end of the year. But due to having to add books because I need to read an entire series, etc., 2026 is starting out with 55 books in the challenge. So starting with more books on the challenge this year than I did last year, which I know I did not complete. Today is January 19th, so again, getting a late start, third week in the year. That seems to be the trend. I think that's when I started it in 2025 as well. And haven't even cracked a page in one of the books so far this year. So committing to the first one, and so we are starting off with Just Thieves by Gregory Galloway. I'm a little nervous about this one. I posted about this either on my blog or in Instagram that this is considered very noir, and noir and I don't usually get along. So we will see how this goes. So the first book for the challenge in 2026 is Just Thieves. Okay, I am 121 pages into Just Thieves, and I wanted to give an update. So I had been worried that this was going to be very noir and I was not going to like it. And it is not actually what I would define as noir. So I think I read that somewhere, or it was based upon the synopsis, and I'm not really finding it very noir. I would say that it is more lit fic to me than to, it's definitely not a thriller. It's definitely very slow moving. So far, 121 pages in to a 246 page book, so almost exactly halfway through. We are just getting to what I would consider a mystery element. So to give some setup of what is going on here, we have really one main character who isn't, because it is told from his point of view, his name doesn't get mentioned until right where I'm at, and now he's being called Rick, and I'm not even really sure that's his real name. But Rick has fallen into a life of being a thief, and hence the title, Just Thieves. And Rick's partner has been a guy named Frank. And through this first half of the book has been just an exploration of how Rick got into this life and how he was partnered or became partners with Frank. And it is while they're out doing their latest job, they work for a guy named Frommer, and Frommer has sent them to a different city from the city where they live, which we don't know where that is. And he sent them to another city, which again is an unnamed city, to do a job. And Rick and Frank are hired to steal an item. Sometimes they have to case the house before they even know what the item is. And then when they feel that they are ready to go into this house and grab the item, Frommer will then tell them what they are getting. And sometimes it is just a box in this location and they don't even know what's inside of the box. And other times it's a very specific item, but they don't seem to care. They're living this life where they are just thieves and they go and they do. And this job that Frommer has sent them on starts out differently for a number of reasons. And Frank is a very suspicious person, and there are some things that happen that kick his superstition into overdrive and make him very leery to do this job. And what we are getting is Rick's perspective and basically him running through all of the choices he's made in his life that have made him be at this place and this point in time doing these things. And he's made mistakes, and in order to get himself out of those mistakes, he has looked for help. And by looking for that help, he has ended up indebted and having to live this life. Even 121 pages, this is very slow moving, and I don't dislike it, but it's not my favorite type of thing to read. I would say it's very much more character focused than plot focused. The plot is secondary to this discovery of himself that Rick is on and the exploration of his relationship with Frank. I would say that I personally, and this is why mysteries are my favorite, I like good plot with good character development. And I don't necessarily need every character in the book to be developed, but I do like series because I feel that I get more character development from a reoccurring main protagonist who I see coming back book after book, and I'm learning more about them and I'm understanding their ways, etc. So I want that sweet spot of great plot, puzzle solving, and characters who are not necessarily likable characters, but characters who at least I understand their motivation and why they're doing the things that they are doing. Rick isn't necessarily an unlikable character, but he has made some really poor decisions over the course of his life that have resulted in him having to be where he is. I have kind of resigned myself to these get a little bit of plot sections and then get a lot of retrospective or reflection on this happened and that happened and this happened. But I will say at this halfway mark, we are potentially presented with a bit of a mystery that Rick may need to figure out. And we have been given the heads up that, oh, if only I had done this, things would have been different down the road. So I'm hopeful that things will sort of get rolling in this last half and move a bit quicker, and I'll get through the remainder of it. But again, so far, not disliking, probably would call this a 4, maybe even a 4.5 star at this point in reading it. So I will check back in when I finished with the book. Welcome to my bed. It is a very early morning and it is still dark outside, and I have just woken up, so I sound very congested and sleepy. But I was very dissatisfied with how I left the synopsis of Just Thieves after I did my last update on the book. And so I went online and I looked at other synopsis to see how far I could talk about it without it being spoilers. And I'm just going to talk about it. So if I think I'm veering into spoilers, I will put a spoilers alert on the screen. But for such a small book, I guess that's understandable. But there are just things that I wanted to say about it to explain my almost apathetic feelings about this book. So I mentioned we have Rick and Frank, and they are thieves, and they are partners, and that Rick was a thief before, and he has brought Frank in to partner with him. What I didn't say before was they met in rehab. They are recovering addicts, and they met in rehab and formed a relationship. And Rick was honest with Frank about what he does, and Frank is a very cerebral person. He's been a teacher before, and he's traveled the world. He's just an avid reader, an avid learner. He's surrounded by books, and he says to Rick, I could make you more successful and less likely to be caught because I can help you learn how to analyze security systems and recognize patterns and not just set you up so you're not getting more likely to get caught. And so Rick has introduced Frank to Frommer, and Frommer has accepted their partnership, but you get a sense that Frommer doesn't love their partnership. And when he sends them to do this job in the city, I mentioned that Frank is very superstitious, and something happens the morning that they're going to go start casing this house that makes Frank question whether they should do this job. And Rick basically tells him, we don't have a choice. We work for Frommer. We have to do this. The other thing that I did not mention is how Rick came into this career path, for lack of a better term, and that is because he got into trouble as a very young man when he was first in college, and his dad worked for the city where they live, where Rick grew up, but his dad was kind of shady. He was like one of those guys who works for the city, but he's always got extra cash because he's taking bribes or he's doing deals. And so Rick grew up in this household with his dad where he was watching his dad blur the lines. And his dad knew Frommer and introduced Rick to Frommer when Rick got into some difficulties in his youth, and the easy way out was to connect his son Rick with Frommer and have his son start going down a path of being a thief. So Rick definitely has a lot of the deck stacked against him, and I see that, but I'm personally struggling with it because the decisions he makes and the lack of decisions he makes are really what is making the pacing of this book so slow and meandering. And I know that's intentional, but I know it's intentional, so I know it's successful, but I still don't love it. For me, it's not something that I'm loving. So I can't fault Galloway's writing and his tactics for being unsuccessful. They just don't work for me as a reader. Basically, the last thing I'm going to say, and this is where we may be getting into spoiler territory, Frank finally agrees, okay, we'll do this job, and they go in and they steal the thing that they are supposed to steal. And this is not a spoiler because this is in an online synopsis. And yes, I'm up before my alarm because we are about a week and a half out from the friends and family opening of the bookstore. And my sleep patterns are just completely off because I come home in the evening and I'm just very tired, and I eat dinner and basically fall asleep. And then I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I've been up since 4, but what I'm going to say next is in an online synopsis. So this is not a spoiler. So we're not in spoiler territory yet. But Frank agrees to do the job, and they go and do it. And then as they are leaving, they are hit by a car. And when they are in this accident, the other driver is stunned, and Frank basically tells Rick, hey, go, get away from the scene of the crime. There's no reason for both of us to have to talk to the police, do all of this stuff. So you go back to the hotel. I'll take care of this. And then we'll go back to home and take this thing to Frommer. So Rick does that. And that is the beginning of the end, basically. And that, the beginning of the end happens very early in this novel, and yet I'm still 30 pages out from the end of this book. So everything that happens after that point, after Frank and Rick separate after this accident, has been, or I should say everything that happens before Frank and Rick separate, has been this very reflective Rick going back and remembering how he got into this life, how he met Frank, how they got together, all the mistakes he made in his life that ended him into this being his only path. So there is a lot of back and forth between flashbacks to Rick's past, which stop then, for the most part, after this accident, and we're just given the narrative moving forward of how Rick deals with the events that come next. And that is where, for me, it really starts to drag. And again, I know it's intentional, but for me, I'm just like, come on, what are we getting to here? Just the months and months and months of bad decisions and indecisions on Rick's part after that accident. That is where we're at. I'm going to read, and then hopefully we will be done, and we can wrap it up and move on to the next thing on the shelf, because I'm ready. What is going on? I've read this page 3 times, and I'm still not sure what's going on. I've finally finished Just Thieves. I cannot tell you what a slog this was for me in such a short book for it to take me so long to finish it. I basically did little micro DNFs, soft DNFs of this book several weeks in a row. It's not even 250 pages long, and I would just read a few pages of it and put it down and have no desire to pick it back up again. Ironically, my score for it was not horrendous. I gave it a 3.2. I think that it did what it set out to do. I just think it's not really a book for me. And I did think it also had a very unsatisfying ending for me. I'm better with an ambiguous ending than I used to be, but there was just so much of this that I kept almost screaming no at the book and wanting to throw it across the room. And our character just made such bad decisions and never learned. I felt like there wasn't a journey. He wasn't improving in his decision making. He just kept making bad decisions. And that just went on through the end of the book. And although I gave this an average score, a 3.2, it wasn't great for me. It wasn't horrendous for me. I just can't imagine picking up anything else to read by this author anytime soon. But it is off my shelf. It is off the top shelf, and we are ready to move on to the next book, which is Murder in the Balcony by Margaret Dumas. And unfortunately, this is not the first book in a series. So here we go again. I have had to add a book in order to not be reading the series out of order. So I will do the count here of where we are. And remember, we started over with a new count for 2026. So adding a book here to the 2026 count. Now, the first book in the series is Murder at the Palace. Palace is a movie theater. And basically, we are introduced to our main character, Nora, who has been married to a very famous and very successful actor in Hollywood for the last several years. And she has assumed the pseudo role of almost like pseudo manager, pseudo personal assistant, pseudo everything for him. She completely makes his life easy. And before they married, she was a very successful Hollywood writer in her own right, and she basically gave up her career to go do all of these things for him, to support his career and to make his life easier. And she has just found out that her husband is cheating on her with his latest co-star. And devastated by that, she has turned to a friend who has a house in San Francisco and owns a portion of this movie theater in San Francisco where they only show classic movies. And she is going to go and run the movie theater as a favor to her friend because the previous manager has died. And when she arrives at the theater, within hours of her arrival, she finds a body in the theater's ice maker down in the basement. And so when that is all uncovered, and then they do the post-mortem exam on this man, they discover that he was probably killed the same day that the theater manager died as well. So Nora, by association, figures that the two deaths must have something to do with each other. Either the theater manager is responsible for this man's death, or maybe her death was not an accident. Maybe they were both murdered by someone, and she starts to try to investigate this woman, the theater manager, to try to figure out what happened to her, why this man is dead in the basement, etc. I liked the characters. I do wish there had been a bit more. Oh, by the way, I'm done with it already. I just sped through this book. It was very, very short. It was a quick read, and I liked the writing style. So I just was able to speed through it, which is great for Top Shelf because I haven't been reading that much off of the Top Shelf. I'm filming this, and it is basically the end of March. And this is only the second book from Top Shelf that I've read this year. So I actually ended up giving this book a 4.3. I really enjoyed it. And I'm happy to have another book in the series to move on to next. I do wish, so one of the reasons why I didn't rate this any higher than a 4.3, which 4.3 is a great rating from me, is simply because there's a cast of characters, and I didn't feel that we had enough going on with them. They were pretty one-dimensional, not hugely developed, and I would have liked a little bit more character development of these secondary, these background characters, which I hope we get to in other entries into the series. And so I do think that if we had gotten that character development, number one, the book wasn't very long. It could have used more of that. It wasn't like it would have padded it. I think it could very well have handled that. And I don't like the fact that it wrapped up on a potential love triangle in future books, and that's just not something that I enjoy. It's not a trope I enjoy. So I'm hoping that when I pick up the next book in the series, that doesn't actually happen. It's hinted out, but it doesn't, there's no follow through on that. Would be a great thing. I think some people might say that the resolution to the mystery came out of the blue. I don't think it did. I think it was alluded to. It was definitely a potential of what was going on, and you had to be a close reader and see that those clues were actually there, which I enjoy in a mystery, especially a cozy mystery where sometimes you can feel like you're being spoon-fed. This definitely had the nuances associated with it in the writing, and I really enjoyed it. I also liked the nod to classic movies, and there is a paranormal aspect. We do have some ghost activity, which I really enjoy in a cozy. So it checked off a lot of boxes for me, and I was very happy to read it. Now I have moved on to the next book in the Top Shelf Challenge, which is a very old mass market copy of Colin Dexter's Last Us to Woodstock. Don't know why I was struggling to pronounce last, but I did. And this is the first Inspector Morse mystery. Now, I had previously picked this book up and read a few chapters, and I'm just getting to where I set it down. And I think I was actually reading it right before I was going to move into this house, and it got packed up and it got put into the top shelf when I unpacked my books, and I've just never picked it up again. So I did reread 60 pages to get to the point that I'm at now. And the only thing I'll say about it so far is the sentences are not short, but the language comes across as very choppy to me. For some reason, it's almost like a statico type of writing, and I do not remember having that issue with it when I first picked it up, but that was over 7 years ago. So maybe my taste changed, or maybe it's just coming across differently to me. Now, this book was written in 1975, and I fully expect there to be some things that are very dated in the book. It's actually reading to me as older than 1975, and I think it's just the 70s become a lost era to me from the 80s, which I remember and have vivid memories of, versus the 70s, which I don't really. And so when things are referred to that are very of the time, they almost seem older to me. They seem like 60s things. There's one description of a character's clothing and her chunky shoes, and I immediately thought of 60s shoes, but 70s shoes were incredibly chunky as well, so that makes sense. But my mind keeps going to the 1960s, not the 1970s, and so I'm making it even older than it is. And I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing, or if it even matters. But that's just my first impressions of it. This will be the last book for this Top Shelf video. It is, like I said, the end of March, and I feel like 3 books in 3 months. I think I just need to wrap it up here and do a quarterly Top Shelf. So I'm gonna get through this one, give the update when I'm a little bit further along, and then wrap up the video and move on to the next hoarder of top shelf books. All right, so I'm about halfway done with Last Bus to Woodstock, Colin Dexter. And I'm definitely past the part that I'd read before. I am not finding the language dated, and I'm not really finding anything glaring like, oh, there's no cell phones. It would be so convenient if they had a cell phone right now. None of that has really come up. I expected this to be a very cerebral mystery, police procedural, and it is, but it isn't. So if you've ever watched the Inspector Morse mysteries, it is often brought up that he attended Oxford and yet became a police officer, police detective. Although there are references in the book to him knowing people at the university, he very much, as a character, downplays himself and feels that he doesn't have a good grasp of things that are academic. And maybe we'll see more of that coming into play of, well, he never, I don't think he graduated. I think he had to drop out of school, or maybe he graduated but he didn't pursue an academic career, obviously. And so he has misgivings about his own intellect in comparison to those people that he was in school with. Definitely Morse's sense of being very awkward around women, but wanting a companion, wanting to be in a relationship with someone, that definitely comes through. And we're definitely at a point in the mystery where I personally have no idea who done it. Now, the case revolves around the fact that this young woman was waiting for the last bus to Woodstock with a companion, and they were told by a woman who came to the bus stop that they had already missed the last bus to Woodstock. And so because of that, they take off down the road and attempt to find someone to hitchhike with. The woman who tells them you've missed the bus realizes after they leave the bus stop that they did not, in fact, miss the last bus to Woodstock. She's given them incorrect information. She feels rather guilty about it. She gets on her bus. She's looking out the window and she sees them getting into a car. So they've been successfully picked up by someone. Later that evening, one of the women is found dead in the parking lot of a pub. And they don't know, they can't confirm who the other person was with her. No one comes forward. Eventually, they do find out who was driving the car that picked them up, but there's no clue as to who was with her, and they don't understand why someone hasn't come forward to explain that they were the other person that missed the bus, and this is where we parted ways, and this is where she was going, this is where I went, etc. There is one lead that they are following up on, and I don't know how they got there. And I've gone back and flipped through, and I'm not sure if I'm just missing it or if it was in the first part of the book where I was sort of just skimming because I remembered reading it. But I can't figure out how they got to that clue and where it's leading. And so I really need to go back and take a look at that and figure that out, because it's bothering me. Like, did I miss it? Is it there? Is it not there? And we don't know how they got this clue. So that is the one thing that is sort of dangling for me. Like, are we not supposed to notice this just appeared, or did I, as a not very active reader at the beginning of it again, did I just miss it? So do you think it is very impressive for the first in a long series. It is well written, and I wish we were getting a little bit more into the character of Lewis, Morse's sergeant. We are told, actually older than Morse, and is married, has a family life, where Morse is this single guy who is seemingly well liked in the novel around the police station, which I think is a little bit different than the TV program. So it's just really interesting to think about the nuances there, the differences there. I always assumed that Morse was quite a bit older than Lewis, and to see in the print in the book that no, Lewis is actually older than Morse was surprising. I watched the show so long ago, I don't remember the individual cases very well. I might if I get to a later one that really stuck out for me, but I honestly do not remember who done it, and I know that this one was adapted, so it will be interesting to go back and rewatch that now that I've actually finished reading the book, when I finish reading it. So I'm going to continue on, and we'll go from there as I come back to give my final rating of Last Bus to Woodstock. All right, I have finished The Last Bus to Woodstock, and I'm going to give it a 4.6. I would say that it has held up really well, and I do think that the way the case was laid out, this might not be for everyone. I don't know that Dexter actually played very fair with us in actuality. I think that we hit about the 80% of the way through the book. We hit this point where Morse starts getting information that we do not get. And so it doesn't actually follow the rules of detection, in that we have to get all of the information that the detective gets in order to be able to figure it out ourselves. I don't think that happens. There is information that is withheld from us, so we don't have the opportunity to figure it out. But I think it held together really well, and although the writing isn't exactly what I'm looking for, it's good writing, and I did get used to it as I was reading it. I would say that it doesn't feel dated. There's definitely, the treatment of women in the book is not great, but it's realistic. It's not that Dexter's writing is mishandling women, it's that he's writing about how women are mishandled in society. This is a sad book. Obviously, it's looking for who killed this woman. However, it's not just that. It is that aspect that I mentioned of when you are touched, even on the periphery of a case like this in your life and your secrets are exposed, it's uncomfortable. There's also a lot of sadness that goes along with that. There are a lot of people who have issues and problems, and being involved in a case like this just exacerbates that. So there is a lot of sadness. Morse himself is a very melancholy person. His life, I don't think, has worked out the way he expected it to, and he is acting as though he has regrets, and there are things that he feels potentially he's missed out on. But when you look at the book from the perspective of it being the first in a really long series, it is an amazing book. And I think it's a good classic mystery of the 70s that is worthwhile to pick up. So that is it for the first quarter top shelf video. And I think we had 2 successful, or actually really successful books, and 1 not so much. So it was a slow start to the year because Just Thieves took me forever because it just was not to my liking. However, followed it up with a good cozy, good first from a police procedural perspective. So I'm going to sign off here, and we'll proceed with starting the next quarter and see how far we get on the shelf to make it through and clean off that shelf in my bedroom. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.